Thank you, and thank you, Tanya and Mike. That was just incredible, and Stacy, and I think just hearing about the impact of gun violence, but also the resiliency of individuals in the community to address it and take steps to, we're talking build that bridge, and that trust building is an ongoing effort. It's not something that just happens once. It's something that needs to happen every day. So hugely impactful. And I think moving on, continuing this theme of gun violence, this panel today is going to be talking about really the importance of engaging communities in violent crime reduction, including the investigation of fatal, non-fatal shootings. We're going to be talking some about a new project that RTI is leading called the National Case Closed Project. Really honored to have Reverend Jim Sumney, who's the Executive Director for the High Point Communities Against Violence, and then Officer Anthony Van de Voorde, Community Policing Officer from Lansing Police Department, which is also the community that Michael lives in. So we'll get started, but really kind of carrying on some of those themes about what can be done from the law enforcement side, but also the idea of building bridges with community partners to better address fatal and non-fatal gun violence, and specifically around increasing case clearances among these crimes. I think for folks that don't know, case clearance levels have declined, especially in recent years. Homicide, but especially non-fatal shootings, is a particular problem for jurisdictions across the country. Some having clearance rates under 10% for non-fatal shootings. And this is a resource issue, but it's also an issue of really focusing on these non-fatal cases and trying to put the same level of resources or attention to solving those, because ultimately solving a higher rate of these crimes is a form of crime prevention. So the Case Closed Project is a Bureau of Justice Assistance funded project, and we really appreciate their support and partnership. So I'll be talking a little bit, giving an overview of the project, where we are with it, and then Stacy who's a key collaborator, Stacy Seacrest, is going to come up and talk a lot about some of the initial findings we've been seeing from our first 3 sites that we've been working with, really focusing on the community-based components, that law enforcement community relationship, and some next steps and recommendations with that work. So. Just to get started, what are some things that this project is trying to address? It's a new initiative. We're about 6 or 7 months into it, but I think it's unique in a couple forms. One, RTI and a team of experts, some internal, but also we have a number of collaborators from across the country, former investigators, advocates, prosecutors, forensic analysts, crime scene. So all the key topic areas are involved in our team, and agencies apply to be a part of this program. And then if they're selected, we go in and do a full assessment of how they respond to these cases. Lansing was one of our sites, along with Greensboro, North Carolina. And the idea is to provide an evidence-based review, sort of a thorough review of how they're responding to these cases, challenges, and also a set of recommendations that build on strengths that agency may have, and that are practicable in terms of how they can be implemented. So how we do that? Well, we do a range of personnel interviews inside the department and outside, including with community members and community groups, prosecution, crime lab, medical examiner's office. We do a policy and training review. So looking at all the relevant policies, or if a policy doesn't exist or needs to be improved related to the response to fatal and non-fatal shootings, including any policies relevant to the community or outside groups. We do a case file analysis, usually about 80 to 100 fatal and non-fatal cases. We go and code those and looking for a lot of critical variables in terms of how the case was investigated, initial response, engagement with the community or lack thereof, and then provide that back, sort of collate all that and provide that back to the agency and do a debrief, and then also look to share those findings with other partners, because a lot of our recommendations involve other partners. But then the project doesn't end there. Really, we then support that agency and jurisdiction in terms of how we can help implement those recommendations. What are other resources we can provide, and then how we can build a larger body of training and support. We're also going to be developing, having multiple national convenings like this to talk about some of these key issues and challenges moving forward, but ultimately to contribute more to this area of evidence-based investigations that can support greater clearance, higher clearance rates, and also greater resolution from the community perspective. So, I mentioned a little bit the project team. All these key areas are involved and really critical towards thinking about this area holistically. That's the project website, and some of the project team bios, or all the project team bios are there. When we think about this community perspective, which Stacy is going to talk a little bit more about, I think it's also really important to understand some of the issues that Michael was talking about in terms of these perceptions around working with law enforcement, this idea of the stop snitching. And I love that acronym, and sort of turning that on its head, and maybe also reframing what it means to work with, to provide information that's going to help solve a case, and to change that narrative from working with your community as opposed to supporting the police, and for community members to understand that this is a pathway towards making solving that particular case, building those bridges, but also ultimately making the community safer. And so hopefully we can start to sort of identify some of those pathways for communities across the country, and also for law enforcement agencies to recognize these types of relationships, and how they go about developing these types of relationships can really help not only their own agency, but also the greater community. So Stacy, if you want to come up, and then Stacy's going to go through some of the findings, and then we're going to have our other panelists talk a little bit more about their work.
Thank you, Kevin. So as he mentioned, we're going to present to you some of the community-based findings from the 3 sites that have gone through the assessment process so far. And these findings are really coming from a set of interviews that we did with leadership of community-based organizations in the communities who are participating in the assessment process. And so we were really interested in talking to organizations who were involved in gun violence prevention and response work, as well as those that were currently in partnership with law enforcement agency. So we thought it would first be a good idea to give you an overview of the types of organizations that were involved in at least our 3 communities. So the typology you see here is not a typology for all community-based organizations, but this is how they looked in the communities that we spoke with. So we had those that had governmental ties. So for example, a county-based family justice center, a municipal office of community safety. These types of organizations tended to serve an entire city or county. And as you can imagine, gun violence is just one of many focus areas that these agencies were working on. Then we talked with folks in neighborhood associations or neighborhood-based groups. These tended to have formal leadership structures like a president, vice president, and so on. They tended to have formal and regular meetings, and the activities that they focused on were really specific to the needs of their neighborhoods. And the community leadership was made up of residents from within those neighborhoods. And so we really had a narrow geographic focus that those agencies were working on. And then we had community-based or grassroots types of efforts, kind of like Ms. Tanya and Mr. McKissick described earlier. These are developed from within the community. They offer a wide variety of service and supports that intersect with gun violence. And usually these agencies are founded based on the mission of the founder who originated the agency, but the types of services tend to grow and evolve over time as additional resources become available or as additional community needs become identified. So in terms of the types of services and supports that these agencies are offering, the idea is not to run down this entire list, but to basically show you that organizations are very active and busy in the community, and that there are a lot of supports and strengths and assets that community-based groups bring to a community. And so, for example, we see formal responses to shooting incidents. When Reverend Summey describes his work in High Point, he'll tell us a little bit about what that looks like. We see them providing a lot of activities that are really meant to build community. And when we talked with our interviewees, they talked about the importance of having law enforcement present at these activities and events to really build that trust that we heard a lot about. So Officer Vandy Vorty will describe a little bit about what that's looked like in Lansing, peer support, victim and family advocacy, and on and on. So before we jump into our findings and the recommendations, we wanted to present a typology for community engagement, so community engagement with law enforcement. And the idea is that not all community engagement looks the same. So it occurs on different levels. And at the very basic level, at the bottom of our pyramid here, you'll see that's basic information sharing. And that's typically a one-way street where law enforcement communicates directly with the community and gives them information, but there's little information sharing or exchange back and forth. As you go up the pyramid, you'll see that the level of community voice, the level of community decision-making, and the level of collaboration between the law enforcement agency and the community increases up to the highest level of empowerment, which is where community really takes ownership of issues and ownership of the response to those issues. And so when we get to our recommendations, just keep this in mind as we talk about what is the best way for law enforcement agencies to work with communities to move them up this level of engagement to the point where it's most appropriate and beneficial, not only to the agency, the community-based agency and the community itself, but also for the law enforcement agency. So in terms of some of the findings, we spent a lot of time in our interviews talking with leaders in the community about addressing community participation or often lack thereof in investigations. So you've heard a lot about this already. So we won't go through this in a lot of depth to repeat information already shared. But one thing that's important to point out is that in many communities, there are Crime Stoppers and other anonymous reporting lines available for the community to use, but there's a great level of distrust in these types of resources, and partly because the community is distrustful of the actual anonymity of these tip lines. And so when we ask, we ask these interviewees, well, what can we do to maybe remedy this problem? So the idea is to address the lack of anonymity. So be really explicit in the messaging that goes out about these tip lines. And if no one's identity has ever been compromised through the use of one of these tip lines, state that explicitly, share it with the community, and then educate your community-based agencies who you're partnering with about this so that they can then be messengers back out to the community about the safety and anonymity of these tip lines. Also, we learned that people aren't always motivated, like Mr. McKissick shared, by financial incentives. So in one of the communities that we talked to, we heard that somewhere around 50% of tipsters who supplied information never actually retrieved their reward. So the idea is to really understand the motivations that encourage people to bring information to law enforcement and to message to those. So when we use the voices of families who've been impacted by violence and those families who are really awaiting a tip from the community to solve their case, that can be really impactful and more impactful in a lot of ways than a financial incentive. We also heard a lot from Ms. Tanya and Mr. McKissick about they're already receiving information about incidents from the community. So law enforcement really needs to take heed of that and use those resources. So how can community-based organizations be civilian buffers or intermediaries for reporting? And how can you formalize that relationship in a way that sustains it? So one suggestion might be to have standard strategies where you get community-based organizations into a neighborhood, 24, 48 hours after an incident to talk with residents about what they saw. Because if you have these trusted resources in the community, it's going to motivate people to come forward. Did I do that? Okay. Did I do that? Okay. So we also talked a lot about factors that are related to non-participation in investigation. So we've already talked about the no snitching code, and we've heard over and over in our interviews, not only from community-based organizations, but also from prosecutors and law enforcement, that everybody is really tired and exasperated by this no snitching code. So we talked to our interviewees and we said, well, what do we do about this? So as you heard, educating the community about what this code is and where it came from, and that really it only benefits the criminals and the harm doers in the community. And you've already heard that some community-based organizations are already leading campaigns around these efforts. That's really important because there's at least one study that shows that sites with higher case clearance also have formal no snitching campaigns. Also, building trust between law enforcement and the community is extremely important to combat the no snitching code. We also heard a lot about the fear of witness retaliation in cases, and that fear is really pervasive and real for communities. And what we heard is that there was oftentimes misalignment between community perceptions of the likelihood of a victim retaliation incident and what criminal justice system actors thought. And so the misalignment, we have to do something to fix that and address it, because to the community, perception's reality. So if you have a real fear that this could happen, regardless of the actual prevalence of these types of incidents, it needs to be addressed. And so law enforcement agencies and the criminal justice system and communities really need to be proactive, put together a response plan to identify and respond and provide safety, and then communicate that back out to the community that we take your issue seriously, and to make people feel safe to come forward with information. There's also some really good resources available that we won't go into, but if you want to reference this about how communities can really start to put those kinds of identification and response plans in place. And finally, we learned that law enforcement agencies can really lean on these community-based partnerships to supplement the efforts that they're already doing. So we all know law enforcement can't do this work on their own. You saw from that long list of activities that community-based organizations are doing, they're doing a lot of this work already. And each community-based organization is going to have its own unique strengths. We heard about resources earlier, so some are going to have more resources than others. So one of our recommendations would be for a law enforcement agency or a community to conduct a community inventory to better understand what opportunities already exist within their communities, and then use that for a launching pad, if you will, to start conversations with the community, to do some shared planning and strategic decision-making, to identify priorities in these areas, and then bring community-based organizations to work together. In our interviews, we heard a lot about competition, again, for resources amongst community-based organizations doing this work. So bringing everyone together toward a common goal could be one way to alleviate some of that competition. And then finally, we heard over and over again, and this is so important, and it was shared earlier today, continue to provide opportunities for meaningful engagement for the community to build trust with the law enforcement agency and vice versa. And so we are really excited to have Officer Van DeVoorde from the Lansing Police Department, as well as Reverend Jim Summey from the High Point Community Against Violence, to tell us a little bit more about what those engagement opportunities have looked like in their own communities. And one more plug, if you may be interested in applying to participate in the National Case Closed Project and go through the assessment process, we have our application at this link here. Our applications are due Monday, March 20th, if you're interested in applying. Thank you.
Me? Yeah. Okay, I'll do it. So, the High Point Community Against Violence is a citizen-based organization that works directly with the High Point Police Department. We have a 25-year-old relationship that began back in some days when, well, there was no relationship. And that relationship began when a group of concerned citizens approached the chief of police back in those days and said, what are you going to do about all of this violence? And back then, like now, as we're seeing, a lot of the violence involved youth offenders, youth victims. So the chief opened the door. He said, well, what are you willing to do? And he said, I'll tell you what, let's start meeting. And just to let you know how well that meeting has gone, every month for now over 25 years, this organization has met with the police every month. Now that's a good thing. There's a lot of information sharing, and that's important. There is a bit of a myth, and it's based upon assumption on both parts, and that is the police sometimes assume they know the community. Sometimes the police also assume that the community likes them. Sometimes the police assume that the community hates them. And all those assumptions could be wrong. And then on the other hand, the community can assume that they know the police and know what they are. And they can also assume that the police are against them and that the police are just pointed out to get them. And those assumptions can be wrong and oftentimes are wrong. And that's why police and community need to share. And they need to share openly, but I must say, and I'm going to put the ball in the first court, because the community does not have the key to open up that door of conversation, and the community does not, the police department must open that door. It is, to me, the responsibility of every police department to open that door and to say, hey, you know, we'd like to dialogue. It's also very important that police leadership, from the chief right on down to executive staff and command staff, that they take time to get to know community leaders. And I'm not talking about folks on the city council or board of aldermen. That's important too, I guess. But I'm talking about getting to know community leaders. As you stated, community watch group presidents, community organization presidents and the staff, or drop in at community meetings, get the schedule from community development and find out what's going on in all the parts of the city. Of course, they need to focus in areas where there is high crime. They need to be there and hear what the people have to say. And they should go in with an open hand saying, okay, lay it on me. They need to be willing to hear it all, the criticisms, the fears, and they also need to bring with them information, and they need to tell the truth. And I'm a big proponent, and back in the days when we were doing particular work in High Point, we had a chief of police when we were doing a drug market intervention program in 5 boroughs of High Point. He stood before community groups before we launched that initiative in every group and told the group and said, you know, through the years, we have made some good efforts to try to keep you safe and to do the right thing. And, you know, there's been some times that we just didn't do it. And there's some times we just sat back and kind of let things coast. And I'm here to tell you, I'm sorry about that. Open the door by apologizing so that people can know that you have a heart about things. It's important. And I know a lot of folks don't want to hear that. Okay. It was amazing how the doors came open after that. Sometimes all people are wanting the police to do is say, hey, you know, we're not right every time. Okay. And it's important. And then that begins to build what police have always wanted: trust. Trust from the community, because then the community recognizing that they're just like everybody else, and the police are, except for one thing. They've got this authority right here. They were sworn in, and they have incredible authority, but they go to the same drugstores, to the same theaters. They're not living on a military base separate from society. They are a part of society with an incredible amount of responsibility that puts their life in jeopardy for the sake of other people's life. And we need to recognize that too. It's not an easy job. There needs to be some mutual respect. Pretty important stuff. So when the doors are open and communication can be established, then information can be shared, and instead of community making up their information, they hear what the information is, and that way they can be truth toters, information toters to other people. Say, no, I was in a meeting with the police a week ago. No, this is what happened there. No, you got that wrong. And that's how it works. You share what you know that is true. It's a beautiful thing. High Point Community Against Violence have been able to, we go into communities, and for one thing, like after a violent crime event, and I sent some examples in to RTI. I don't know if they reproduced those or not. I don't know if it was my responsibility. If it was, I didn't do it. If any of you need it, you can get a hold of me and I'll send it to you. But we have these flyers that I got a couple of examples of the flyers that we hand out in communities where violent crime has happened, particularly after following a homicide. And we do that so they can get the information. We go door to door in the area that is most affected by that violent crime event, so that we can, first of all, say, we're here because of the event that happened just right down the street here. We regret that happening. We just want to let you know that we care, the community cares, the police cares, that this has come in here and brought this really something that's so alarming to your community. We want to work together. Here's the latest information on that. It might be that on that is the arrest that was made with the person arrested and allegedly, guilty of that. And it also could be that the person has not been arrested, or those responsible for shooting up the whole community, and they're seeking information. It's got the information for the lead detective in the case. It's got the information for Crime Stoppers. And by the way, Crime Stoppers is great stuff. And that is one way to really garner stuff. And it's got the reward, but just like I think you said, there's a lot of times folks don't even get that reward. They just want an anonymous way to share it, so they're going to get brought into it. By the way, in the communities, there's a real fear about telling who did it. And there have been many times where there's a lot of pressure put on folks because of that. And we all know how well it is that can happen, that if George kills a member of Jack's family, it could be that Jack's family is garnering their resources on how to hit George's family. And if community hears that, they need to let somebody know, because it's coming again. So just that openness of communication that, first of all, has to be opened by police is quite important. You want me to say anything else or what? Okay.
Officer Vandenbordy.
So yes, I'm the community service officer for the Lansing Police Department. I've been in law enforcement for about 15 years. I actually started here in North Carolina for a department. I worked for 10 years there before I transferred back up to Michigan. Out of 15 years, I've had half of it not doing community policing. The agency didn't know what it meant, didn't know the term, didn't know anything. It wasn't until a change in leadership that brought in community policing that I actually realized what it was and what it does. When I transferred to the Lansing Police Department, they're no stranger to community policing. The roots of community policing within the Lansing Police Department has been studied from MSU to other facilities or other educational facilities across the nation. And within 2 years of being with the department, I was asked to become the community service officer. The Lansing Police Department's community service unit is comprised of 12 community police officers, 1 community service officer, myself, a sergeant, and then an executive lieutenant who oversees the unit. The 12 community police officers, what they're doing is they're focused and they're assigned to specific neighborhoods. They are given specific boundaries based on data, statistics, whatever the upper command has deemed necessary for. So they're focused more on a patrol aspect. And then I have the rest of the city. So out of almost 36 square miles of the city of Lansing, I probably cover 35 of those 36 miles. And what I mean by that is 90% of my stuff is done in an office. I focus more on quality of life issues. The fear of crime, those get pushed out to the community police officers and to the road officers. I'm there more of a resource to the community. So my office handles such things as neighbor complaints and different things like that. And I oversee our neighborhood watch groups, which is a good asset when it comes to trying to find those neighborhoods to get into. When I first took over the community as a community service officer, we did a lot of events. We averaged probably close to 700 events a year. And these are not just the events where we're out and you see our tents. These are also including in meetings and community meetings, so on and so forth. But what I saw is that we weren't the primary engager, right? So the city of Lansing would have their Winterfest and we would be one of 30 or 40 different vendors. During my meetings and stuff, I would talk about the community service unit and I would get the common question of community service unit. Like a lot of our citizens didn't even know that we had one. So my focus was on being the host or being in partnership with these organizations, such as Mikey 23, which was before me. But I added to those with other organizations. One in particular that we work close with is Peckham. Peckham is an organization that works mainly with youth. Then they're all already into the court systems. Annually, we started last year, we do what's called a round table event. This was a partnership between us and Peckham where officers get in plain clothes, the youth are in plain clothes, and we have program sessions where we just literally sit around the table and talk about youth interactions and police interactions and different things like that on an equal level. They get to know us as a person. They get to understand where we come from, our family lives, how personal you want to get. But we also get to understand them and their neighborhoods a little bit better. You know, it's not so much for law enforcement to just be out into the community and attending National Night Out, which occurs on the first Tuesday of every year, you know, and those type of things. But it's important for the law enforcement agency, that, in my opinion, is to be out there and trying to find those engagements, trying to find those focus points. There were some events that I did where it was a community-wide event, but talking to some of the visitors and stuff, I found out that they were coming from following counties or neighboring counties, neighboring cities, and my focus is Lansing. So what I did was I scaled some of those down from a more citywide aspect. We talked about last night. The north end of Lansing and south end of Lansing is completely different, same as the east and west. So I focus mainly on the neighborhoods themselves. I put those events out there where we're going into a particular neighborhood with either a homeowners association or a neighborhood watch group or some type of organization that's already based in that neighborhood. And we're out there creating a platform for communication and conversation, one-on-one. You know, we're not out there for any type of enforcement actions. You know, that's one thing, you know, we don't want to see at these events is we're out there just to build that rapport and that communication. I believe that based on our aspects that we have improved our relationships and our communications with a lot of the organizations and a lot of the community members. I don't have any statistics or, you know, examples. One thing I do when I'm out there and I'm doing my job and with our unit in the Lansing Police Department is, you know, as long as we're doing it right, it makes it easier for the detectives and the officers that are out on the streets. And I do occasionally hear back from some of the officers or some of the detectives that so-and-so reached out to them, and there's plenty of times too that I've gotten anonymous emails or even those late night phone calls about incidences or things that are going on in the community to get forwarded on. That's the relationship that I've built, is because I'm not just there for the law enforcement aspect of it. I'm there to assist them in other needs of their life. And I think that is a big building block and a big, it's a good way to build a rapport and the trust when people are willing to call you at midnight to give you some information. And, you know, so yes. Sorry.
Well, thanks to you both. So I'm sort of moderating this session, so I think we're going to open it up to some questions from the rest of the audience. But while you get your questions together, I'd like to ask Officer Vandy Vorty just one question from a law enforcement perspective. Can you talk to us about what is rewarding to you in terms of this role, and kind of, you know, not every agency has a community service unit or community police officers, but some do. So could you just tell us a little bit about you know, what's rewarding about that role, and what would make someone good in that role?
So in this position, someone has to be outspoken. They have to have the ability to talk on topics and situations that are uncomfortable for most officers, or even for most public people, or people from the public. The rewarding part of this is, like I said earlier, if I'm doing my job right, it makes the job easier for my fellow officers. It assists them in building their relationships. To me, I don't have any special training in community policing. I've never done any studying in community policing. What I've done is used my experience in law enforcement and experience in life, and just the understanding that I can build that relationship, or take that negative aspect of what someone might think of me or my agency and turn it into a positive aspect of it. That to me is probably the best thing. Thank you.
And can we open it up to questions from the group now? And I think we have some microphones here, here. So we can take questions from the audience, please, if you have them.
I didn't talk that good. I know I didn't.
Okay, while y'all are thinking, oh, we got a question. Okay. Oh, 1 second, please.
Thank you. I'm just curious, with all the understaffing you're seeing at the agencies, how that is impacting the ability to do that type of non-enforcement work and building the relationships that you're hoping to.
So yes, our department's we're experiencing the same thing. We have 12 CPO spots. We currently have 8 of those filled. So it's a team effort. So what we do is, you know, we have CPOs signed to specific areas. The ones that aren't covered, they're expected to also assist with those areas. With all the community events that we do, I've sacrificed, I would say, but I think that's what we do in this profession, right? You know, giving up our weekends, our evenings and stuff to attend these events, to build those relationships, build those rapport. We lean on each other. Our Lansing Police Department's command is very great and very supportive of what we do. They're the first ones to volunteer and to assist us on some of that aspect too. So you just have to be creative. I took over this position in 2020, June of 2020, right in the middle of COVID. I had to get creative. I wanted to do a trick or treat thing. You know, everybody's in the house. I had to figure out how I could do it by the rules. And we ended up coming up with a trunk or treat drive-through event. And that day we gave away a little over 800 and some bags of candy. You know, you just have to be creative with what you have with your resources. But it is possible. It is capable of doing it.
If it's okay for me to, let me jump in on something. Now, what you're saying is quite true with a lot of law enforcement agencies across this country. For instance, right now, High Point with about 240 positions for officers, about 48 of those are open. That's rough. That's rough for that. Greensboro, there's around 100 positions open. So our chief of police actually was on television and said, so I just want to let you guys know out in the city of High Point, you know, if it takes us longer to do something or we don't get to certain things, I'm going to tell you why. We can't, or it's going to be slow. Nobody wants to hear that. Nobody. But that was the case. But he said priority cases are going to be priority. You know, somebody shooting in a community, a homicide, all these dangerous things that are headline stuff. Of course, the police are there like that. But one of the things you were saying is that there's a lot of unsolved cases where someone's been shot, they were not killed. So in other words, they were not homicides, but bodily injury due to gunfire. I'm going to tell you, those things fall by the wayside. You're working on the homicide because somebody died, and you got a lot of resources going toward that, and you're low already. These aggravated assaults and these aggravated assaults with guns, to be honest with you, is just down payment on a homicide that's coming. And police know that that background work and getting into those cases are vital to cutting off some of those things. But right now, with depleted resources, there's just a lack of being able to get the job done, which causes the public to have less confidence in the police, and the less confidence magnifies into something else, usually not positive. I think the honesty that our chief had was great. I think he should have come right out and said, well, this is what's going on. And right now, because of the flavor in the country, it's hard to get people to say, yeah, I want to be a police officer. You know, you can get people to do something else. It's not always great because there's a negative attitude toward it, but alone it's dangerous and people are not stepping up to the call. I think that some of that trend is starting to move a little bit now. When I was talking to Anthony, he said things may be improving a little bit, and I hope so. You know, that doesn't mean we sweep all the bad things under the rug. It means we address the bad things, but we go on with information that's trustworthy. We go on with building relationships, and we learn together in society. We need the police. Quite frankly, the police needs the community. When Anthony mentioned about community-oriented policing, that stuff started all the way back in the 1980s. 1980s. And community-oriented policing just was birthed out of that, just what it sounds like, where police will get to know the communities that they're supposed to serve and protect. And you remember a long time ago, and I do when I was a kid, that cops used to walk a beat on the street. They literally walked it and they knew everybody. They walked that beat during the time when people were doing all kinds of business. They walked that beat into the night, and I know that some of the beats were closed at certain times at night, not a lot going on, but they were there to build those relationships and to be a presence for the community. Now, of course, everything's gotten bigger. People are riding around in cars and it's far less personal riding around a car, but we have a lot more area. And plus there's a safety factor about a police officer just walking by himself somewhere, let's be honest. But it's so important to understand that police are facing challenges. Communities need to understand those challenges and say, what can we do to help? Be surprised. Some police departments are going to say, we'll let you know. Very important.
Yes.
Yeah, so, and going on that too, the partnerships and your question even further, the partnerships are important. A lot of my events, I have other organizations that participate with us, other youth groups. We even have explorers and different things throughout the department. So again, it's those partnerships that we have with our community members. I know Mikey 23, if I called him and told him I'm doing an event and I need 4 or 5 volunteers to assist me with, he'd be like, when and where? And that's, again, that's the thinking outside the box, or not using just law enforcement officers, you know, if you don't have them, to accomplish what you're trying to do.
Great, thank you. Any other questions from the audience? Oh, 1 second, please.
So currently the Lansing Police Department has no school resource officers due to COVID and other things beyond my comprehension. School resource officers aren't in any of the high schools anymore. No, none. So a lot of our, some of our events that I work with a local radio station. We do backpack drives for school and different aspects of that. Again, trying to reach the youth in the schools. And so those are some of the events that we're focusing on, is getting us back in there. on a more of a community policing basis.
Do we have any other questions? And yeah, we'll be bringing a microphone back and then we'll get you next, Mark.
Hey, my name is Matt Fry. I work for the City of Raleigh Police Department. My question pertains specifically to community buy-in. So what are some suggestions or ideas that you guys have for encouraging the community to come out to some of those open door events that you had mentioned? We've had a lot of community events, and what I've noticed in attending a lot of them is that we have the same like 6 people that show up, and we just can't seem to get actual community members out there, you know. So for instance, we just had a release of a de-escalation policy that we created. We sought community input for that policy. We created the policy, went back to the community with the policy to read it to them, to see, you know, what their suggestions were about it, and, you know, to do that. But in each one of those meetings, I had about 3 community members that actually showed up, and we just couldn't get anybody else to show up. And so the frustration is, how do we mine that community for people that care and that want to come out and that want to do that kind of work? And I was just wondering if you guys had suggestions for increasing the, you know, that kind of participation.
I've never had any events where we're trying to pass literature or anything. I give away free food. People love free food. You give away free hot dogs, everybody comes.
That's right.
No, but I do different things like that. I have vendors that I work with. They specifically give me special pricing. They'll give away 300 hot dogs that day, or 100 pizzas, or whatever it is. Again, something to entice them to come out and speak to us. We're working with Michigan State Police. They have a community service unit also. They have some grant funding, and they want to bring swag and different items that we can give away at these events and elicit participation. You know, so we're thinking about doing like a sports day where kids can have footballs and basketballs and helmets and stuff like that. And then maybe a household day where we're going to give away bags of, you know, paper towels and cleaning detergents and stuff, you know, that the adults want or need, that kind of stuff. And then it just depends on your advertising. If you haven't seen the Lansing Police Department's community Facebook page, it's huge. It is huge. In the last year, we've gotten some new public information director, and they have really changed the way that we do our social media. And I think that is a big aspect. I get a lot of my neighborhood groups, my associations, my neighborhood watch groups, and those organizations to advertise what I'm doing. So when I go into the neighborhoods, because I'm trying to focus on the neighborhood, I don't want to post it on our social media and let everybody know. My groups actually go into the neighborhoods days prior and actually hand out flyers and knock on the doors and exchange their email groups and different things like that. I've found that just finding that community asset to assist me in the advertising is what helps me get the numbers up. And they're not always huge. You know, I've had events where I'll have 200 people show up, and I've had events where 25 people show up. You know.
Yeah, he's right. We learned by repetition what he said. That's exactly it. If you feed them, they'll come. They really will. Let them know. But again, you got to keep it within what you can supply. If you do it for the whole city, then get ready. You know, I mean, that's rough. But if you keep it, you know, compartmentalize it according to community, spread the word like that, feed them something, have a raffle, go to a local business and say, are you willing to donate an item so we can raffle it at this event we got going? Give out a few tickets, say they have to be present for the raffle. Don't make the event 5 hours long. Make the event an hour and a half. Get everybody in there, tell them what you want them, give them the literature, tell them that you want to engage with them. We're here for you and all that good stuff. Kiss all the babies and let them know that you care about them, that you're here to support and serve together.
And also, a lot of my events are out in the public. So I pick a neighborhood. I'm right on the side of the street. I got big old A-frame signs that say Lansing Police Department Community Service Event. We get a lot of people just by foot traffic. You know, they'll see the police out there. I'll bring some of our assets out there, some of our organizations with us, and literally I pick a block. I find someone that will donate their property to me, whether it's an old school or, some type of business. And I'm right there at the intersection in front of everybody with lights on, tents, officers standing around, people standing around, and it garners a lot of attention from people that are just driving by and walking by. What are you doing? What do you guys got going on here? And that gives me that opportunity to engage and converse about what we're doing. We're just out here to talk. How's your neighborhood? What's going on? So.
Thank you. And Mark, I believe you had a question.
Thanks, Mark Pope, RTI. Thank you all for speaking this morning. Ms. Tanya spoke a little bit about the individual impact of unsolved murders, of wondering, is this individual involved? Is this family involved? I'm curious from y'all's perspective, everybody, what are the psychological impacts both on officers within the department and the community, larger community, with unsolved murders? It's just something I've been really curious about as I've heard y'all speak this morning.
Thank you, guys.
So, having my son's case unsolved, we have ex-chief Mike Yankowski, something like that. Okay. And so he's no longer there. So again, my son's case is 2015. And one of the cases, so I got the relationship with him. So every time something happened, he calls me up and say, how you doing, Mike? What's going on with you? And so having an unsolved aspect of it, it's personal with him because he left and he wants that case unsolved. And so having an unsolved case, you, as Tanya would say, you relive that all over again, what's going on with, if that's the person that done this particular case. But with Officer Anthony and Assistant Chief Rob Barkers, it's personal with them because we have that relationship, Now, mind you, a lot of individuals that has unsolved case back in Lansing, they don't have a Mikey 23 Foundation to have a voice, to speak. And so we try to be their voice and let them know that we haven't forgot about you. And so it becomes personal, and we as Mikey 23 Foundation, we try to embrace them and let them know about the unsolved case that we haven't forgot you either. So we try to keep that communication open with the rest of our club, so to speak, in that neighborhood. So the unsolved case, it becomes personal with them because we have this bond together with our law officials. And so therefore we try to continue to keep that open mind up and let them know about, we haven't forgotten about you in the aspect of the unsolved. But again, it's still in front of us again. Every Christmas holidays showed up as a reminder for us because it's personal with us.
Does any other panelists, Ms. Tanya, would you like to respond?
As far as with the impact for the GPD, they take it very hard when they do not solve these cases, when they have to come to us every 6-7 months and give us an update, give us a phone call and say, nothing new. For me, I was one of the fortunate ones. My detective, she worked with me. Communication is the key. She worked with me. She listened to me. We put it together. She did the hard work part of it, but she went and got him and took him through the court system. A lot of families do not get that. It is really, really rough on a family that they know somebody killed their loved one, but nobody tells you who did it. We do government at the governmental plaza. We do paint the city orange, and we put signs out of each one of the ones for that year. If their family approves it, we put out a sign with their name, their date, their age. We have 14-year-olds out there. We have 14-year-old children out there on those signs. Is it normal? Ask a lot of people now. Yes, it is. Ask me, hell no. No, it's not normal. It's not normal for me to get a phone call and they say an 8-year-old has been shot. And we find out that the young man shot the wrong house. But this young lady went to sleep, preparing to get up in the morning to go to school. but then she's sitting up in Moses Cone Hospital on life support fighting for her 8-year-old life. So who gonna speak for her? Tanya. Tanya gonna get out here. She's gonna put boots on them grounds, and we're gonna find out who pulled that trigger and killed that baby. Because it's not normal. Not in my life, it's not normal. It's not normal when I get a phone call from a mama at 3 o'clock in the morning and she can't sleep. Well, guess what? I answered my phone, so what was I doing? I wasn't sleeping either. I have police officers that speak with me, and they tell me. It's a lot of folks that don't know that the police is impacted hell of a hard because some of those are family members. My brother, he's the captain in the Greensboro Police Department. It's been 9 years for me. Not once have I talked to my brother and asked him how it impacted him. He knows how it impacted me because of my mama. We got the same mother. So my mama was able to tell my brother how it impacted me mentally and physically. I didn't know how it bothered my brother. So I talked to a lot of the police officers in the building. And I asked them, how do y'all and why do y'all do the things that y'all do for the community? And the community is so ungrateful. They don't care. They only care when it happens to them. So that's why I advocate for the Greensboro Police Department. I don't like everybody in the Greensboro Police Department. But I work for the Greensboro Police Department like I work for my community. Because it's important for us to stop these killings so I don't get a phone call for about an 8-year-old. And y'all don't know how bothersome it is to get those phone calls. Because not only do I relive it, but at night, I tear my living room up. I tear it up. Because my mental has been broken so many times. I was done and broken in 2022. I was over it. I wasn't doing this work no more. I was done. But every time I throw in my towel, my father, he throws it back to me and tell me it's yours. So I go out here and I do what I do. It impacts the police just like it impacts the mothers. It impacts us all. So don't think it's just because it hasn't gotten to your doorstep yet that it won't come, because it will. It's happened to Winston-Salem police chief. I believe her son got killed. You got police in the department in Greensboro. They have relatives. I'm a sister of a chief. I'm not the chief of captain. He'll be that chief one day. But I'm his sister. And it's impactful. It bothers us. So it don't just work. It don't just hurt us. It hurts the whole community. It hurts the whole entire community.
Thank you, Ms. Tanya. Do we have additional questions from the audience? If not, I have maybe one or two more for the panelists before we break for lunch, and y'all keep thinking. So I wanted to ask Reverend Summy, being from the faith community, and we've heard a lot in our interviews with community-based organizations that a lot of the efforts are faith-led or faith-based. And so an interesting fact about Reverend Summy's work is he was instrumental in High Point when the High Point Drug Market Initiative was first implemented, the focused deterrence approach there. And so he was really instrumental in bringing the community along with that and has been doing that work ever since. So if you could tell us from your perspective as a faith leader, what the faith community can do and why they may be important in these efforts.
Well, faith community, particularly in inner city work, let's just be honest, we're not talking about the suburbs or something here, but inner city, core city faith groups of any faith, religion, whatever, they are impacted by the crime in their area. We were. Back in the day, I'm not kidding, in the early 90s, we had so many prostitutes walking the street, sometimes on Sunday morning, our folks couldn't even pull into the parking lot at church for the Johns picking up the girls, okay? That was due to our drug market there. Thick with it. After we implemented that and we worked with the folks on the street, it wasn't about slamming everybody in jail. It's about telling them this is wrong. I'm not going to tolerate this. But we love and we care about you. And through all these years, we've been able to continue to work with the folks on the street. But they're not on the street doing this. Of course, we know drug markets changed over the past 7, 8 years, and even the drugs have changed. It's a mess. But the faith community, frankly, as far as I'm concerned, I'm just talking as one minister. If a minister or a faith community cannot embrace their local community and stand up not only for the things that are right and moral, but to also embrace the problem and the folks that have the problem, then they're not doing their faith at all. They're worthless in their faith. I don't care what faith base it is. I don't care if it's Christian, Muslim, Buddhist, whatever. They're not doing their faith. And I don't know. I have, frankly, very little respect. I do realize there's a fear factor. And speaking as a Christian, you know, the most important thing that the faith community can do is to love and to care for people and to love and care for people who are in trouble. And the Bible tells me that perfect love casts out all fear. When you're doing the right thing, you don't have to be very fearful. I'm going to tell you, folks, I've been out there and I'm truly trying to think right now of something I have not done on the street in situations, but I was going because I cared, and I cared about the folks that were doing it, the folks who are in trouble, and how it impacted the community, not just the church folks, but the community. Most folks in the community don't go to church. It's not about that. It's about just being involved. When we were wanting to do a different drug market intervention, there were 4 churches specifically in one area of High Point. And after I'd been involved in it in the west end of High Point, I was asked to go along with all the majors, and we took the 4 ministers that was in their churches out to lunch at a place of their choosing. Remember that, of their choosing. And we met them there and we did all the little nice things. And then we said, hey, we need you guys. We need you to help us. We probably like for one of the churches to host so we can get your community together and the faith community together, tell them about what we're doing. We want them to be informed about how we're going to work this. We need their help as we try to work with the folks that are out here doing this. It's not about putting them all in jail. It's about helping turn their lives around. We need your help. We could not get either one of those 4 pastors to make a commitment whatsoever. And I went back over them time and time again saying, please, I mean, this is your territory, you know. And frankly, I've got 2 other churches, minister friends of mine. We went over and did the work and worked in that community and provided the resources. This is before High Point Community Against Violence really had the resources to back up what we were doing. So we got some other churches to come in and do it. But the one minister finally told me, he said, well, you know, there's something you don't understand. I know for a fact that some of my members' grandchildren are the ones out here doing this. That's okay. And he said, if it appears I'm working with the police and then one of their grandchildren gets in jail, then they're going to pull that back on me. And I said, so, and I meant it. I wasn't being unkind. I wasn't. There has to be an amount of accountability that we bring with everything we do. And the faith community ought to be the one doing that. I understand, but that's when his opportunity is to have a talk with grandma. about what's going on. You know, all that's necessary for bad stuff to triumph is for good folks to do nothing. And we need to do some things about this, and the faith community needs to be engaging in it. I've traveled all across the country with this stuff back in the day, and the most difficult group I saw in all of America to engage some of these programs we've been trying to do was the faith community. And that was my experience. And it's always bothered me. It has. And I'm not trying to act like everybody ought to be like me. But man, when you got all that trouble around you and you want, hey, that's part of who we are. We're supposed to help folks that are in trouble. We're supposed to hear them. We're supposed to be a point of confidence for their lives. To me, that lets us know the faith community is in more trouble than maybe the community we think is in trouble. How I feel.
Thanks, Jim. I think we have maybe time for one more question. Brian.
Hey, thanks everybody. I don't want to be the guy that delays lunch. I'll make this real quick. All right, I'm just wondering, in the Lansing Police Department, y'all have the community oriented policing unit. How do you diffuse that as a philosophy throughout the department and not just have it being siloed in one unit? Is that something that you're doing, working internally, as you're also working with external stakeholders?
Yeah, so use some big words there for me. No, joke. So our positions is time limited. So I'm in my position for 3 years, and then I will go back to the road, and then someone else will take up my spot. Same thing with our CPOs. They each have a 3-year assignments to their areas, and they come back. Most recently, the chief has changed the way the city's broken up into response areas from sectors, the 4 sectors, to now we're districts. So each officer is assigned their district. And the thought is to give us a better opportunity to learn our neighborhoods that we're going to be more involved in. So those are the ones that every time I come to shift, that's the neighborhood I'm going to. That's the neighborhood I'm responding to. And it's just to bring that more personal aspect to it. Instead of having, 10 square miles to work on, I'm working with 2 square miles now. So.
Thank you. Well, thank you all to our panelists for participating today. We have lunch here on site out here in the hallway, so please feel free to pick something up. And we are reconvening at 1:30. Thank you.
That's good work. Hey, Tom. Yeah, we met. Well, did I not meet you? Didn't you come to High Point when one of the ladies? Yeah.